Hello, you're watching Bearwood West Yard, and today I'm going to be bringing you the first instalment of the new Weekend Weathering series, in which I'll be showing you how to rust up a 16-ton mineral wagon. Before any paint gets brought out, it's of high importance to do a bit of research first on common rust or grime patterns. For this particular wagon, it's actually quite hard to research, as not too many photographs exist of them, and those that have been saved in preservation may be in a siding, well away from public view. Fortunately, Google's able to help out. This is one image that I found on Google, and it demonstrates the rust patterns quite well, so it's more towards the frame and quite patchy. As we've done our research, we can now start to disassemble the model. So we can gently pry the wheels out. Sometimes they do take a little bit of getting out to get out. Right, any parts that get taken off, I would recommend that you grab a small plastic bag. I use this dish mainly because that's what I have on hand at the minute. And then you need a small little cross-headed screwdriver. I got this out of a Christmas cracker a couple of years ago, but I'm sure you can find one or even buy one somewhere for a dirt cheap price. And then by loosening these screws, what they will do is they will release the NEM locks, which just put in your plastic bag. Or in my case, my little dish. Oops, camera flew about there. And then once they're all out, the chassis and the metal weight should quite easily come off of the box. Right, so I've cleared up the desk a little bit, and we don't need the chassis at the minute, so that can go in with the rest of the parts just over here. I've already gone and collected our paints, so we need the Humbrol Acrylics number 113 and 160. You can pick these up for about £1.50 or so at any model shop or hobbycraft. And also this Reeves brown paint, got that from the range for about £2. So it's pretty good in a way. The paint itself comes up to about £5. And then the brushes I use are, again, they're Humbrol modelling ones. So one's got long bristles, the other one's got medium to short, and these were from Airfix gift sets where they come with the paints. So without further ado, let's get to the paint. So the first paint we want is number 160, so let's apply this. You want a nice amount on your brush, not too much, and you literally just cake it on like so, getting all into the corners. And that, don't worry if you get a little bit on the sides, because that will add to the weathering later on. And very quickly let that dry for a little bit, and then just dab it with a tissue. And this is where personal preference comes in, because if you like your wagons really dirty, you can keep it like so, but if you like it relatively clean or relatively like, you can just brush it, wipe it down to keep as much of the original paint as what was there, or the factory paint I should really say. Just keep dabbing it really, and then I like to leave mine with a little bit of paint on it, and that's so it's a semi-worn state. So yeah. So that's now got into all of the corners, and that's quite nice. So that's the darker shade. So you always start with the darker shade, or I do anyway. is with rust, the darker the shade, the older the rust, and the lighter the shade, the newer the rust. And what you don't want is a lot of light, otherwise it just doesn't look too convincing. So now I'm using 113 and I'm only using a little bit, and it's pretty much the same, but the problem with mine is that it's gone all gloopy, so there's really just pigment in there. There's no real, you have to, you won't have this issue, whereas I do. So you literally just do the same. Mine's more of a wash, but it doesn't really matter whether you have it as a wash or not. And you just do the same. Sometimes you do have to do this a couple of times, so you will have to put the same paint number on 2 or 3 times, depending on whether you're happy with it or not. But the good thing about using acrylic paint is that if you're not happy with it the first time, you can always use a bit of water to thin it while it's still wet and it will come off, or you can just use a bit of force and it will come off anyway. So that's a bonus, really. Right, that's now, I'm happy with that. So you can see that although, let's try and get it in camera, or in focus I should really say. Right, you can see that although I've got a lot of dark rust, I've also got some lighter stuff coming on now. And one of the things about using a tissue is that sometimes the paper fibres actually do get stuck in there. So what I use is like an artist's kind of brush, and only use it though once the paint has dried, and always use it in a downwards stroke. Next, if there is anything that is still wet on there, it will go downwards as if that's the direction that rain has fallen. Right, so I'm now back. Just had to do something for a family member just then. So let's get back on to some 160. So again, just getting right at it into the corners. On this one there's a little bit less factory detail, such as that white stripe, and it's mainly just the vehicle's number. Take as much on as you want, really. So this is the heavier toning, I believe. Just let it dry for a second. One of the things that I found from research is that it always seems to be the corners that are the most rusty, and then in the middle it's patchy, and then on the serial numbers there can sometimes be some slight rust, but the majority of the time the numbers are kept as clean as possible, because otherwise without a running number the vehicle cannot run. As in the event, as I believe in the event of an incident, or if the wagon needs to be identified and it can't be identified, then it's not really safe to run, because for all that BR would have known, it could have been registered to have defects on it, and if it's one that did have defects and it had been taken out on a train, then it could cause any number of issues. Taking on some 113 now. I'm just going over it with a dry brush, in a downwards direction. Don't always need to do a bit of dry brush, but it helps depending on what kind of effect you're after. So that's a heavier effect. And then the Reeves paint now comes in. I'll shake that a little bit. And then I usually use what's in the lid, as it's a nice little palette. Then this paint, I'm going to start on the lighter side. This paint is actually one of those where it doesn't really stay around much. It's more, I want to call it a sacrificial paint, but it's not, because that's not the right word. But if you kind of get what I mean, it's there and the effect of it stays, but not for long. There we go, that just adds a deeper brown to it, so that it's not one shade out of being monotonal. That gives it some life. Right, so this is our wagon as it stands, and comparing it to my other wagon, it's looking pretty good. I think the only thing it really needs at the minute is just a little bit of black on it to darken it up a little bit. Yeah. And I'm using Humbrol paints number 33, which is acrylic number 33. Let's put that on way too thick. But like I said earlier about if you ever get any imperfections that you don't like, you can always just put some water on, dab it off, and Bob's your uncle, it works. So you can redo it. So it just goes to show that when you think of weathering, it's not as daunting as it can first seem, and as the chances of messing up your stock are really very slim, to be honest. Then you'll notice that I've gone over this several times now, but yeah, when you're happy with it, you can stop done. You only need to dab lightly with it, and then you can see that that's the effect I've got from that. It will focus. There we go. That's darkened the rust up ever so slightly. Right, so the door again is pretty much the same. So you just use number 160. I'm going to try and get as many corners as you can. Ideally, you want to be using the smaller brush, but I'm using the larger brush, mainly because it just covers a larger surface area in a smaller amount of time. Right. That, and then with the door, you can be a bit more rough with it, I would say, because on the door where it would see a lot of opening and closing, the rust doesn't really form too much. It's just only in the nooks and crannies like so. You see it around where it comes out. So if you can get it in the corners like so, then you're good. And this way you want to use the tissue as like an abrasive paper, but it doesn't work too well as an abrasive, as you'll find that it just disintegrates. But it does well when you're trying to be abrasive against paint, like so. I keep saying like so, I don't know why. If you find that I'm rambling on a little bit, please feel free to ignore me. I get like this bit sometimes. But now for some 113. That's coming on nicely, and then for some of that Reeves brown. You don't have to use the Reeves brown, it's good for adding extra tones, which is just why I use it, but other than that, the black thickens it up. You can see now that looking on the darker side of things, that black is properly seeped into the to the rust, so that's now looking darker. And if I can get the light properly onto it, it's looking all right, looking good. But yeah, that is, long story short, how I achieved the boxes. Adding on some 33. And there we go. That's the door. One thing I find about the door is that that's where you want to be caking on the most, 33, or leaving the most anyway, and that because it's opened constantly, and it's open to all sorts of muck from the contents of the boxes, as they could be moving anything from coal to limestone, etc. As in its name, it's a mineral wagon. Right, so now it's time to get the ends weathered. So starting off as usual with the darker colours, so 160. As you might be able to tell, I did have a go at this just now. This is the second shoot of this, and I had to take the paint off as I wasn't very happy with it. Yeah. Always in a downwards direction, never horizontal. Yeah, as I said a bit earlier, that some of the fibres and that, it does tend to disintegrate, but for the brush it comes off. As long as you're gentle with it, it doesn't take any of the paint off if it's still wet, but even so, I wouldn't recommend doing what I've just done while the paint's still a little bit wet. So that was a little bit of 113, and now for a little bit of the Reeves brown. we go. That's the end. That's one end done. Now to move on to the other end. This one's where there's quite a bit of detail on, so this end can actually be quite difficult. I've not actually done this yet, so fingers crossed it goes well. You'll have seen that just now, to go along the top, I did have to go horizontal, but that's only because when it comes to things like that, it's kind of hard to go vertical, so you can go horizontal for that. I think this is the side where you actually have to put the most pressure on the tissue, and you will start to feel like that you need to change the tissue, of which I use ordinary toilet paper simply because it's soft, spongy. You kind of get the picture. Least to mention that the black had a joke of it's thoroughly absorbent too. Of which is what you kind of need to absorb the paint that you don't want, or the excess paint. Now for the lighter rust, I've just gone for the main midsection. Starting to get a bit hard to see, and it doesn't help that the camera won't fully focus. Is that in focus or is it out? There we go. Yeah, you can see that around these two blocks here, around here, and that, it's starting to lighten up a little bit. And that I'm not going to worry about. Well, yeah, I'm not really going to worry about dabbing them too much, as they're underneath, so it'll be prone to fresh rust coming up. And then now to cake it all in the Reeves brown. Yeah, by now you should start to be getting the picture on what paint's gone first. Now this is just my general order for, so it's 160, 113, Reeves brown, and then 33, which is matte black. It's quite difficult now to get into the top parts, and if you do end up taking some paint off, then don't worry too much. So there you have it. It's your weathered mineral box. It's taking you about, what, just over half an hour? Coming up 40 minutes possibly? Definitely coming up half an hour anyway to do that. So I'm not going to do this other side because you've seen now how to achieve that. So let's get on to the chassis. Okay, so I brought the chassis out of the glass dish, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the small brush and just a tiny little bit of 160, not that you can see a lot on there, and just very lightly. The chassis itself doesn't actually need to be rusty. Just a little bit of rust to show that it's been affected by the elements. Not too much. You don't want it anywhere near as heavy as what the main box is. So like you can see, the bit that I'm putting on there is way too much. Way too much. It was when weathering the frame. You're supposed to be weathering it, not painting it like the box. So like if you get a little bit there, like in the corner, that's alright, because that's where most of the rust accumulates. So if you have to, like sometimes I just dab it down on there to get most of the paint off. And then I'm only dabbing it because some of the paint had been affected by the water that was on there from the wash. So, and you can see there that it's pretty much still chassis black as per the plastic. And this is where the Reeves paint comes in now. So this stuff you want to be applying quite thickly, because don't believe it's not actually acrylic. I think it's just standard paint, so it doesn't really stick, and it's mainly just for the corners again. So I'm getting a nice coating on there. This stuff doesn't actually dry too quickly either, so it's quite nice, and this stuff you've got to dab off with. And depending on your preference, you can even just get the larger brush and just brush it out, and that to cover most of the frame where, when you're dabbing it, where it misses. So you can see that you've got some streaking on there. Now the next paint is one that we haven't used yet. This is number 29, which I believe is called Dark Earth. And this one is going to give the more earthy kind of effect. So a little bit of track grime, etc. Sleeper grime, that's it. That's what this will create. You want this not too heavy but not too light. Like in some places it can be light, but in other places it can be quite thick. Like I'm getting it there on the handbrake rail, sorry, as that's where it's quite noticeable, right on the underframe. So on the main part of the frame, like where I am now, that doesn't need to be done too much, but where I am on the handbrake rail, that can be covered pretty much. And again, it's personal taste as to how weathered you like your vehicles. So you can either have it very heavily weathered, like it is at the second, where it hasn't had a wash in absolutely ages, or you can just very lightly go over it and make it seem as if it's had a nice bit of a clean up. Okay, because of how light it is, I don't think it will actually show up. Let's try adjusting with the light. Yes, it's hard to see in the light, but some people I know just leave the chassis and just go on a light over with number 29, which is the Dark Earth just here, mainly because the other colours don't really show up a lot. And then the final bit, the final touch that I add to it is number 164. 164. I just get this out of the lid, and it's usually just the thinning liquid that comes in the pot, and that's usually just to darken up some of the areas that have been covered a bit too much in number 29. Just to make it seem a bit more patchy rather than uniform. And this can also represent a bit more grime as well, and I also add this to the chassis to make it seem as if the original colour of the chassis is seeping through, especially if you've gone for a medium weathering like I have. But yeah, so that is pretty much how to weather the chassis. I'll video it again in better light, as the light in my room now isn't too great. And that for viewing this, so I'll try and get this in a better light in a second. But yeah, that's pretty much how to do that. And then the buffers are pretty straightforward, literally just the same on the frame again. So 160, then a little bit of then a coating of Reeves, and then 29. For the buffers themselves, I don't actually do a lot with them. I just give them a coat of number 33, which is the black just here. So that's pretty much it, and then maybe just a light coating over of 29, dab that off and leave it streaking. The last thing to weather up now is indeed the wheels. So for these, they should be relatively rusty, so I'll go for 160, and then I don't actually use the Reeves paint on this one, mainly because there's no real point in using it, I find. I'll just apply that on there, dab it off. Can apply quite a lot of pressure to it because it's a Variet. So you have some patches where there's more, some patches where there's less. And also add in a little bit of 113. Making that quite patchy. And then I just go straight for some 29. and that's how I achieved the weathered wheel. As we've now weathered up the wheels, we can reassemble the model. So we've got our box and chassis, so we can put them back together. And before we put the wheels on, get your plastic bag, or in my case, my glass dish, and put the nem locks back on. One of the things that's good to do is when you take the locks off in the first place, leave the screw in, as I found out a little bit earlier that they can be a little bit of a pain in the backside, so to say, lightly, in getting back in. And they literally just screw in, easy as that. Now for fitting the wheels back in, let's put one side in, and then with the wheel that's still out, just lightly push down on it, won't affect the weathering, and in it goes. Just spin the wheel around to make sure that it is in its hole. You'll know if it's not, and you either just bring it back out again if it's not, and then put it back in. It can be a little bit awkward at times, where sometimes it doesn't want to go in, but most of the time it will go in. If you do get a little scratch on the weathering on this part here, don't worry too much, it's not going to be visible. So, and there you have it. That's your very nicely weathered 16-ton mineral wagon with no airbrush required. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching the first instalment of the weekend weathering series. I hope you'll stick around for more, and I hope this video was of any use to you. So thank you very much for watching, and hopefully see you in the next one.